All right, let's get right into it. If you're prepping for the UPSC exams, you know the second round table conference is a big deal. But have you ever stopped to really ask why? Why did this incredibly high stakes meeting with Mahatma Gandhi himself in attendance just fail so completely? Well, today we're going to break it all down. We're going to dissect the anatomy of this crucial failure piece by piece. This one sentence says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly sums up the whole affair for Mahatma Gandhi, and really for all of India. He traveled all the way to London carrying the hopes of a nation, and he came back with absolutely nothing. So our mission today is to figure out exactly how that happened. We're going to look at who was there, what the big fights were about, and the political storms brewing in the background that pretty much doomed this conference from the get-go. A conference like this doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It was built on a really shaky foundation, a mix of hope, a whole lot of political maneuvering, and what was basically a temporary ceasefire in India's fight for freedom. The stage was set, for sure, but the cracks were already starting to show. So let's quickly walk through how we got here. In 1930, you've got the civil disobedience movement going full steam ahead, really shaking the British Raj to its core. The pressure was so intense that it led to the Gandhi-Irwin Pact in March 1931. Now, this was a massive compromise. Gandhi agreed to call off the movement, and in exchange, the Indian National Congress agreed to show up for the Second Roundtable Conference. And that's how, by September of 1931, Gandhi was on his ship to London as the representative of the Congress. Okay, now I want you to just picture the scene in London for a second. This was not a simple two-sided negotiation, not by a long shot. The table was absolutely crowded with people representing a huge, complex web of different interests, and honestly, a lot of them were in direct conflict with each other. Just look at this lineup. It really shows you what a challenge this was going to be. You have Mahatma Gandhi, the sole representative for the entire massive Indian National Congress. But then you also have the brilliant and formidable Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, there to fight for the depressed classes. You've got leaders like M.A. Jinnah for Muslim interests, the powerful Maharaja speaking for the princely states, and even pioneering women delegates. With that many different agendas in one room, finding any kind of common ground was going to be an uphill battle from day one. And underneath all the nitty-gritty discussions about finances and voting rights, there was one huge fundamental disagreement that basically brought the entire conference to a grinding halt. It was a total clash of visions for what a future India ought to look like. So here it is. This is the heart of the problem. Gandhi arrived in London with the absolute conviction that the Indian National Congress, and only the Congress, was the true voice of all Indians. In his mind, Congress stood for everyone, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, even the so-called untouchables, against their common enemy, the British Empire. And this is where everything hit a wall, because nobody else in the room agreed with him. Leaders like Dr. Ambedkar, Jinnah, and the princes, they immediately and very forcefully rejected Gandhi's claim. Their argument was simple. They represented distinct communities with their own unique interests that they felt the Congress couldn't and didn't speak for. This created a massive divide right at the start that they just couldn't cross. You can see this clash perfectly in the heated debate over electorates. On one side, Gandhi argued that the depressed classes, or untouchables, were a core part of the Hindu community. So giving them a separate electorate would be like tearing Hinduism itself apart. He was totally against any special treatment for minorities. But on the other side, Dr. Ambedkar made a powerful case. He argued that without separate electorates, the depressed classes would be completely powerless, always dominated by the upper castes. For him, a joint system just wouldn't guarantee true representation. This became the single most bitter and unresolvable fight of the entire conference. Now, as if these deep internal disagreements weren't enough to sink the whole thing, there were also huge political changes happening back in Britain that pretty much sealed the conference's fate. It was like the ground was shifting right under the delegates' feet, creating the perfect recipe for a complete deadlock. Let's just tick these off. First, right before the conference, the British Labour government, which was more open to negotiation, fell. It was replaced by a national government that was dominated by the much tougher Conservative Party. Second, back in India, the more sympathetic Lord Irwin was replaced as viceroy by Lord Wellington, who was known to be a hardliner. Third, Britain was smack in the middle of a huge financial crisis and had to go off the gold standard, so India wasn't exactly their top priority. And finally, you had powerful figures like Winston Churchill who were just fiercely opposed to the very idea of negotiating with Congress as equals. Any real political will for a compromise had just evaporated. So with the Indian delegates stuck in a deadlock and the British government basically losing interest, the conference just fizzled out. The British Prime Minister, Ramsay MacDonald, decided to take matters into his own hands, which led to an outcome that was decided for India, not with India. So here's what they walked away with. Okay, 2 new Muslim-majority provinces would be created, a few committees would be set up. Yawn. But the really critical part was that last point. It was a clear threat. If you Indians can't agree on how to represent minorities, then we, the British, will just impose our own solution. And this, of course, became the infamous Communal Award, a one-sided decision that gave separate electorates to all sorts of communities. And this says it all. After all of that travel, all the debates, all the drama, how many concessions were made on the central Indian demand for freedom? Exactly 0. A big, fat nothing. The one thing the nationalist movement was fighting for was completely and utterly ignored. Gandhi really did return empty-handed. Of course, the story doesn't quite end there. That explosive issue of representation for the depressed classes led directly to the Poona Pact a year later, in 1932. This was a major compromise hammered out back in India between Gandhi and Ambedkar after the conference failed. They ditched the idea of separate electorates, but in return, the number of reserved seats for the depressed classes within the general electorate was hugely increased. It's a really vital postscript to the failure in London. So, as you study for your exams, this is the really big question to think about. Was the failure of the Second Roundtable Conference a brilliant, cynical British strategy of divide and rule? Did they intentionally use these internal conflicts to sideline Gandhi and the Congress? Or was it the tragic but maybe inevitable result of the deep, real, and at that time irreconcilable divisions within Indian society itself? The real answer, as is so often the case with history, is probably somewhere in the middle. Thanks for joining me.